Hi everyone, or if it's just Sam, hi Sam. This is my molecular and cellular biology presentation. I chose to focus on skin epidermis, or to be more exact, human skin epidermis. And if you didn't know, my name is Bligh Hueske. Before we get into the molecular and cellular stuff, I'm going to tell you why I chose to focus on the epidermis. I, like many other people, like to wear makeup. And to take this off, you need to use some kind of solution or wipe to take it away. And unfortunately, my skin is really sensitive and it doesn't like a lot of these solutions. And so it usually ends in a breakout, which is not optimal. After lots of research, I found this product. I think this is the first one, called the Magic Eraser. It's a microfiber cloth that you can use without any soap or solution to take away your makeup. And this is kind of a more generic style, which this one's just from Walmart, so it's really accessible. I included these diagrams and this microscope picture of what the microfiber particles look like. And I never knew what they looked like before, but now I understand why they do such a good job cleaning, because all of these pockets act as little areas for the dirt and grime to go. Whereas this picture might be of a makeup wipe not really doing a good job, it's just pushing it around, which is why they need a solution to make the dirt and makeup and sebum, which we'll get to, stick to it. So without further ado, here is the structure of our human skin, or the epidermis. The top part, the hair and the stratum corneum, all the way down to the adipose tissue or fat cells, which is where we'll stop. Underneath this would be muscle or something, but we're not really going to talk about that too much. So to quickly go through it all, we're going to cover the hair, the stratum corneum, which is right here, the granule cell layer right here, basal cell layer is next, which is right here. We have the sebaceous gland, which this is one of the more important slides to look forward to. We have the erector pili muscle right here, and we have the sweat gland right here, which this is an ectocrine. We have an adipose, which would be right here, but we'll get to that. The blue stringy bits are the nerves, and then we have the hair follicle, which is right here. So the hair is here, and then this is the little area where it grows from. We have the collagen and elastin fibers, which make up this white connective tissue attached to the erector pili muscle, the dermal tissue, and the hair follicle. And then we have the arteries, which are, I think they're these white ones maybe. I'll be honest, I don't really know the difference between veins and arteries, but we'll get to that. We also have fat or adipose tissue, which is where we'll end. Starting with the hair and hair follicles, I knew that there was a hair cycle, but I didn't know how exactly it worked. We have the telogen stage, which is the resting phase, or you could think of it as the dormant phase, where nothing is really happening. And then we have the anagen, which is arguably my favorite. I love long hair and I wish my hair would grow longer, so I'm rooting for the anagen. And then we have the catagen phase, which if you're a male losing your hair, you might be afraid of this. Maybe you don't care. But the catagen phase is when your follicle is getting ready to shed the hair. When you actually shed the hair, that's called exogen. Next we have the stratum corneum, which is this layer right here. The stratum corneum is made up of corneocyte cells, which are dead keratinocyte cells. Those are from this layer, which is the basal layer. We'll get to that. The stratum corneum layer is what we can feel with our skin. So that's where our dead skin cells will eventually flake off, which I never really thought of my flaky dead skin as once being a lively, bloopy skin cell, but that's how it works, and it's pretty cool. Oh yeah, one more added thing. This is our outermost layer, so it helps protect us. Okay, keep going. We have the granular cellular layer next, which is right underneath the corneum stratum layer, which I'll be honest, this was really hard for me to understand. I'm not a doctor or a dermatologist. I'm just a student interested in the epidermis, so I'll do my best to explain it in a way that I understand, but just keep that in mind. These granule cells change a lot over time, and that's what is so important about them, the different stages that they have and the different functions they have while they're changing. They go through something called a critical survival and plasticity, which I'm not really entirely sure what that is, but I do know it has to do with their maturity and the differences they have as they mature. And most of these cells actually die before they reach full maturity, which makes sense if you think about our bodies aging. A lot of things are going to die before our bodies are ready to die themselves, like when you get gray hair or when you get wrinkles. That's all because things in your body aren't being produced anymore. So I think of it kind of in those terms. Next, we have the basal cell layer, which is something we talked about a little bit already, the lively little bloops. This is one of the most active states, or the most active cell layers. This is where the keratinocytes are, and they're constantly dividing all the time. They're just at work all day or a day. And then we have the melanocytes, which are these darker little cells, these little bloops, which produce melanin, which if you didn't know, that pigments our skin to be darker. So that's when you see freckles or darker skinned people have more melanin than lighter skinned people. And they start out as these keratin cells, and as they mature, they move upward towards the surface of the skin. So we saw them here in the stratum corneum being really flat, and then eventually flaking off, and then eventually being turned into dust. So to kind of bridge my understanding with the granule cell layer, which is this one right here, I like to think of it as kind of like the teenage years or something, or maybe like a midlife crisis, where these are like the fun little babies that are just cruising all the time, and then they kind of go through this awkward phase that's hard to understand until it becomes old and dead. All right, let's keep going. That brings us to the sebaceous gland, which is this little gland right here. In my opinion, this is the most important slide when bringing my interest into fruition. So when we're talking about the microfiber cloth, that has a lot to do with this sebaceous gland. This gland produces a fatty or oily substance called sebum, and the sebum is mixed with triglycerides, wax esters, squalene, cholesterol, and even cellular debris. All of those substances are mixed here, and they're constantly excreting through the hair follicle and making their way to the surface. Some people produce more than others. I am one of those people who has really oily skin, and it's really hard to deal with. This is when the microfiber cloth comes into play. So we take our stratum corneum with our flaky dead skin cells, our external factors such as makeup, dirt, grime, and then we have our sebum, which is all mixed up on our face and can clog our pores, which is causing acne. So if we take that microfiber cloth, it does a really good job cleaning everything and lightly exfoliating away those skin cells, those flaky little dead keratinocytes or corneocytes, and making sure everything is really clean and helping it function properly. Whereas if you take something like a really drying soap or an oily makeup remover, it can get in here. It can actually cause more harm than help, because if it's clogging these pores, then it's only going to create a huger problem underneath the skin, like those big pimples that some people get. Not optimal. Next, we have the erector pili muscle, which I'm actually going to go back to show you because this picture is kind of hard to see. I didn't realize it until I started talking about it. So this is the erector pili muscle right here. This is the connective tissue, which actually is not really a part of it, but this is what connects it to the dermal tissue right here, the basal cell layer in this picture, and the hair follicle right here. This erector pili muscle acts as a temperature regulator. So when we're feeling cold, this muscle will contract and produce heat to warm us. Since it's attached to the hair follicle, it'll actually make the hair stand straight up when it contracts. So that's when you hear someone say like, "Oh, I was so scared, the hair on the back of my neck stood up." Or when you think of a dog that's really aggressive and barking or protecting something, you'll see that hair on the back of their neck stick up, which is pretty cool. Next, we have the sweat glands. There's two different types. This is the apocrine, which I think I called it the adipose earlier, but I meant apocrine. And then we have the ectocrine. Ectocrine ones aren't attached to hair follicles, whereas apocrine ones are. The ectocrine ones are all over our body, including our palms and our feet where we don't have hair. They're abundant everywhere. Whereas these ones are only attached to hair follicles, so you only see them where we have hair, which is most abundant on our head or our armpits, but you'll also see them on your face, your arms, anywhere where you grow hair. These act as body temperature regulators, so it's kind of the reverse of the erector pili muscle, whereas this makes you warm when you're cold. The sweat glands help cool you when you're too hot. So that's pretty cool that they have reverse functions and they kind of work together. An added thing with the apocrine sweat glands, since sweat is mostly water, it has some salts in there too, but it's mostly water. It's not oily or fatty such as sebum. I like to think of it as a cleaning agent to help unclog your pores. Like that's your body's natural way of helping when you have something stuck in here. And since sebum is so abundant and coming through here all the time, the sweat really does a good job kind of taking away that buildup, perhaps. Next, we have our nerves, which are all throughout our whole body. But when just talking about the epidermal layers, we are going to talk about the sensory nerves that function there. So these help control our body temperature. They help us with pain and other sensations that have to do with the epidermis. So I like to think of this as when we are feeling cold, that tells our erector pili muscles to start contracting and working to warm us up, or it tells us to start sweating when we're too hot. And when they aren't working properly, they'll be really numb feeling. So that's when you feel numb, or when you, like, say your foot falls asleep and you feel those pins and needles. It'll be really tingling, and it can even be slightly burning. Next, we have the collagen and elastin fibers, which make up the connective tissues, which I showed you in the erector pili muscles. I'll go back to show you. This white right here is the connective tissue. These are made up of collagen proteins and elastin fiber proteins. Collagen proteins are thought of as like a suspension bridge, where they're very, very strong. They're a little bit flexible, but for the most part, they're just really strong, stable proteins. And then elastin fibers are kind of the opposite, where they're pretty weak in comparison, but they're very elastic and they're thought of like rubber bands. So together they work to create our connective tissue, and it works to prevent our skin from tearing when we get pinched. But everyone's had a bad pinch where it does tear their skin, and that just shows that it's not impenetrable. It does a really good job, but it's not, the end-all solution. Next, we have arteries, which are all throughout our whole body. I'll just go over this kind of quickly to get to the epidermis, but We have the pulmonary arteries, which have low oxygen count, and then we have the systemic arteries, which carry oxygenated blood to our body tissues throughout our whole body, including the skin cell tissues and stuff like that in the epidermis. The blood that travels from our heart starts out in these large tubes, and they eventually branch down into smaller and smaller ones until they reach the microscopic arteries, which are called arterioles or arterioles. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. The artery wall is built up into these 4 layers, which arguably they consider it only these 3, the tunica media, tunica intima, and the basement membrane, because this last one on the outside, the tunica externa, is actually made up of collagen and elastin proteins, the connective tissue here. So that's what deciphers it from the rest, but I like to include them all together because without that protective layer, the collagen and the elastin proteins helping do its job, these would just tear and bleed out all the time and we would die. So they're just as important, even though they're slightly different. Then we have our veins, and I'll admit I don't really know the exact difference between arteries and veins, but I'll do my best to just go through it. I do know that we have blood vessels, which connect the larger superficial veins that are underneath our skin to the deeper veins in our muscles. The blood vessels remove skin cell waste, and then they also take vitamin D that we get from the surface, and they take it to our organs to use in a more productive way, which is super cool actually, and I didn't know that. The superficial veins can become damaged, and that's when you'll see varicose veins or spiderweb veins. This happens when the blood isn't circulating properly, and that's how they become damaged. Deeper veins can also become damaged, and that's when you'll see blood clots. Or I guess you may not see them, but you probably feel them. This is our last bulk slide before the ending, and this is on fat or adipose tissue. Now, a lot of people in society see fat as a bad thing, but without this, we would die. It's very important. For a little bit of background on me, I was on the wrestling team, and when you start the season off, you do this test that tells you your body fat percentage, and then you get this little paper that tells you how much body fat you can lose safely. So, for instance, I weighed about 125 pounds, and it told me I could get down to 105 pounds, which is crazy. That's like the absolute lowest you can weigh, being like 4% or 10% body fat or something like that. And I worked with my coach to find a nice number, which was only like 5 pounds. But it's really weird that children or teenagers are conditioned to think, I need to lose this fat. It's important for me to lose this fat. I need a low body fat percentage to be considered healthy. I think it's because obesity is something that's really high right now in our population. And so people are on both ends of the extreme where it's too much adipose tissue and at the same time not enough adipose tissue. So finding that good balance is where you want to be because it's really important for us to have it. They're located underneath the skin, but it also can be around our internal organs. And it acts as insulation for our bodies, so without it, we would constantly be hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. And that puts a lot of stress on us, and we would probably die. The next thing it does is it acts as padding for our internal organs, which is really cool. One thing that women have that men don't have is this extra padding underneath their belly button that actually is there to help protect the internal sex organs that are there, which I didn't know until recently. And I think that's really cool that our body just knows to help protect us in all these ways. Like, I don't have to tell my body, I need fat here to help me. It just knows exactly what to do. The last thing it does is it stores extra nutrients to be used at a later time. So each of these cells is kind of a nutrients reservoir, and without them, we would constantly need to be eating or else we would die. So thank you, adipose tissue, and thank you to the rest of our body for being so magnificent. That brings us to the end of the slideshow, and here are my works cited. I did it in an MLA format, so everything is in alphabetical order. That means that this isn't like hair follicle to adipose cells, it's in alphabetical order. And I hope you enjoyed it, or at the very least, I hope you learned something. And thank you for watching. Bye.